Hey everybody, Pastor Dave here, and as we get ready to start heading towards the fall, we all know that we are going through a lot of changes in our personal lives, in our world, and the youth ministry is going to be going through some changes as we reflect on what is youth ministry for? What is it about? What are we trying to accomplish through youth ministry? And as we think about that, I am going to be doing this a series, several different parts, about 8 different parts, just short videos as we go on this journey and as I unfold where youth ministry has come from and where youth ministry is going. And as we do that, I do want to promote this book. If you're interested in learning more about youth ministry, sorry, I got to figure out how to put it on screen. It's called The End of Youth Ministry, question mark, by Andrew Root. And it's not about youth ministry itself ending, but maybe ending how we have typically done youth ministry based on the past and how we need to move into doing youth ministry today. That's an excellent book. There's also a great book called Sustainable Youth Ministry, and also another one called Christ-centered Youth Ministry. Those are 3 excellent books if you're wanting to know more about youth ministry, where it's going, and the shift that has taken place in our world and the shift that needs to take place within youth ministry. Now, we all know that because of the coronavirus, we've gone through a lot of changes with our schedules, with our lives, in our world today. But even before the coronavirus, in our world, when it came to families with teens and parents, there has been dramatic changes, dramatic shifts from the 80s, the 90s, the early 2000s, and now. How we do youth ministry today should be very different than how we did it in the early 2000s, in the 90s, in the 80s. But that's one of the things where we get stuck. We tend to want to keep doing the same things over and over again in the same way over and over again, but missing out on what is important right now. Now, I will fully admit, as a lot of you know, I did not grow up in the church. I did not start going to church until the mid 90s. It was in, believe, 94, 95. It was at the end of my freshman year in high school. So I was in a youth group myself in the mid to late 90s. And thankfully, I had an amazing youth group that I was in, amazing adult volunteer leaders, an amazing youth pastor who invested in our lives. But youth ministry then is very different than what youth ministry should be today. And I keep saying should be because there's a tendency for us to keep doing youth ministry, or trying to keep doing youth ministry the way that it's always been done, when teens' lives and parents' lives are much different, even from the early 2000s. One of the things that happened in the 90s, early 2000s with youth ministry was there was a big focus on trying to slow the lives of teens down. Their lives were moving very fast, and so youth ministries not only wanted to share the message of Jesus, but they wanted to provide this safe, secure place for teens to go to have their lives slowed down, to experience fun, silly, exciting events in a safe environment that would keep them away from the fast way of life, whether that was drinking or doing drugs or having sex. There was this wanting to take teens who at that time tended to have a lot more free time. There was not as much parental oversight, especially in the 80s and 90s. There started to become more in the early 2000s. But there was this focus on teens need more activities. They need more things to keep them busy, to keep them out of trouble, to provide these safe, secure, non-fast environments to help them be kids or be teens. But there has been a big shift when it comes to our world today. Where, yes, of course, COVID-19 has slowed things down, and I think people have noticed that. There were so many things that closed, that shut down, that, the school ended, sports ended. There were so many things that got canceled. I think so many families felt like, I don't know what to do now. What do I do now? And the thing is that while it's been frustrating, it's been annoying, it's also given us some time to reflect on how do we spend our days? What are we investing our time in as a family? And also, how are we spending our days and our time and our planning as a youth ministry? Now, compared to the 80s, 90s, even the early 2000s, where teens then had typically a lot of free time, teens' lives now, today, they are highly scheduled, super full. They're not just in one activity. I mean, parents are bouncing around and bringing their kid to gymnastics, and then they got to go to a different kind of practice, and then they got to come home, and then they have this online meeting with this other group that they're in, and it's jam-packed schedules. And where in the past, parents were not necessarily absent, but they just were not as highly engaged in the lives of their teens. They were working, they were doing other things, and teens had a lot more time and a lot more freedom, so to speak, without parental oversight. A good example to think about is the TV show Stranger Things. If you're into that kind of sci-fi kind of stuff, you'll notice it's based in the 80s, but it could definitely apply. Some of those themes could apply to the 90s, where these teens had so much time to just go on all these adventures and travel around, and they weren't scheduled. Those things wouldn't happen today because their schedules would be full and their parents would be right there. There would be no hiding the girl 11 in their basement because their parents would know within like an hour. And so things are they're just different now. That's not bad. And so I want to make sure we hear this. I want to make sure we hear that I'm not saying that 80s and 90s ways of life are, and even early 2000s are superior to ways of life today. It's just different. And so we see teens' lives now today much more scheduled, lot less free time. We find parents are highly involved in their teens' lives, super engaged, sometimes even to a default, a fault, where we sometimes as parents, even as a parent of younger children, we can be tempted to be that helicopter parent that's always hovering over our kid, or that bulldozer parent where we are trying to bulldoze any problem that comes in our way. And I think there's this temptation on the part of us as parents where we want to strive to do whatever we can to make sure that our teens make something out of their lives. Andrew Root in this book talks about that a lot. Where as parents, we feel this pressure that we have to have our kids in all these events, all these different activities, because we want them to be happy. We want them to be successful. We want them to make something out of their lives. So they are happy. So they are, live a good life. But with that comes enormous pressure on parents. Enormous pressure on parents to always have their kids in something, to be performing, to be recognized, to be noticed. And then there's also, because there's that pressure on parents, then there's that pressure on teens to always be performing, to never fail, to not make mistakes, to not do anything embarrassing, to always succeed, to figure out who they are and not waste any time that they have. And I think that's a big part where we see today, teens today are the most stressed, anxious, and depressed teenagers we've ever seen. And I know some people are going to quickly go, well, what do they have to be depressed about or anxious about? They have a good life. You're right. They do. But they experience intense pressure from themselves, from their families, from the world to always be performing, always succeeding, always moving forward, always, be recognized, get noticed, make a name for yourself. And with that comes intense pressure. And so I'm going to stop now, and I'm going to continue in our second part here in a little while. But this is just our first part as we look at how have the lives of teens switched, changed, and what did that mean for youth ministry, and what does it mean for us today? Thanks for joining me. Take care.